Okay, good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to welcome you here today for the third panel of the DASICON event, Drivers of Destruction, Forces Behind the End of the Old Order. Now, I know we've all just had lunch, so we're hoping to provide some stimulating discussion to get you out of the post-food slump. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the panelists. My name is Ursula Gerhard. I'm in the first year of the MICE program here at the Diplomatic Academy, and I have the honor to be speaking today with 4 distinguished academics who will be your panelists. Let me begin at the far end with Ms. Velina Tchakarova. Ms. Tchakarova is a geopolitical strategist here in Vienna and founder of the consultancy company FACE, For a Conscious Experience. Until 2023, she was the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and she holds a master's in political science from the University of Heidelberg and has special expertise in global systems transformation, geostrategy, as well as the EU policy in Eastern Europe. To her left, we have to her right, sorry, that's terrible. To her right, I have Professor Reinhard Mechler. Professor Mechler is the head of the Systemic Risk and Resilience Group in the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and he's visiting professor at the University of Oviedo. His expertise lie in ecological economy, climate risk and resilience analysis, and he brings more than 25 years of experience to the table. Next to him, we have Dr. Dániel Kondor. Dr. Kondor is a postdoctoral researcher at the Complexity Science Hub. He holds a PhD in physics from Utrecht University, and he applies network and data science to the study of large-scale societal systems, exploring human mobility, geographically embedded phenomena, and agent-based modeling to better understand how complex interactions drive systemic change. Last but not least, we have Professor Erin Jenne, who is a professor of international relations at the Central European University here in Vienna. She's a specialist in ethnic conflict, nationalism, populism, and international security. Her research examines how domestic and international institutions shape the containment or escalation of emerging conflicts. What I'm particularly excited for with this panel is that we have such a wide range of academics from such a wide range of backgrounds. We have a geopolitical strategist, we have an ecological economist, we have a physicist, and we have an international relations and political science tutor. So hopefully it means we can draw some connections between the different fields, making some multidisciplinary links. That being said, let's dive right into the drivers of disruption in today's world, the forces behind the end of the old order. And I would like to ask each of you, perhaps starting at the end with Ms. Tchakarova, to share a few words on which driver of disruption you personally find to be the most alarming in our current world. If I hand over to you.
All of you who actually decided to stay for the last session. Having this wonderful weather today, we really appreciate your kindness, and I hope it's genuine interest rather than some sort of obligatory participation. So let us make this session worth it. Now, coming from the background of global politics, global system shifts, and geopolitics, allow me to give you a very, very short overview of what I consider most urgent and most, I wouldn't say worrisome, because I'm in the field of dealing with critical uncertainties. These are processes and events whose outcome we cannot predict. So in my field, when I have someone calling for World War III, for instance, and certainly right now you have read such headlines, right? World War III. Now, I argue this person is probably a little bit confused, It's normal because it's a critical uncertainty. In fact, we do not know. So what I do is trying to make sense of these kind of critical uncertainties in the field of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geotechnology. And you already clearly see the nexus between these three major arenas, which is what is geographic space, what is actually derived from certain national interests or access or lack of such to critical raw materials, or critical supply chains, or critical commerce corridors, etc., etc. And this is the first segue I have for you. We are right now already in the manifestation of this newly emerging world order, one that, of course, is with an open ending, so we do not know, is it now a kind of Pax Americana 2.0, question mark? Is it a kind of chaotic and volatile multipolarity, question mark? Or is it even, as I actually argue, and this is the framework I'm using right now to make sense of this complexity, a kind of a new Cold War 2.0 between two major centrifugal forces of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geotechnology, namely on the one side, US-led kind of bloc, of course, under the American leadership. And as we see right now, conviction doesn't really work with partners and allies, so America is using more coercion rather than conviction to gather a kind of a new orbit. And you can actually position it as a kind of a Western bloc, if you wish. Let's just stick a little bit to the old terminology. But then we have also an anti-Western bloc, and it's clearly, and I want to highlight anti-Western in its modus operandi and in its DNA, and this is the China-Russia modus operandi of strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains. So again, here you have a clear indicator, a major force of disruption, a variable that operates across geopolitical domains, geoeconomic domains. Think of all these kind of new arenas of competition. And just to give you one example, the Arctic is now being facilitated by the Dragon Bear as an alternative maritime and commerce corridor that is supposed, of course, to enable China and Russia to operate freely, and that means without the control of the United States. And final point, of course, technology. And again, here we see it's a winner-takes-all mindset. It's actually us or them. The winner will decide and will actually impose the new rules of the game, the new global order, if you like, and we are in the middle of the competition. So I wrap it up for you. No matter whether it's going to be a volatile multipolarity or a new Cold War, there is no, or let's say, no plausible scenario right now for direct conventional confrontation between the United States on the one hand and China and Russia on the other, and that's good news. And the second point is the rise of the middle powers as the most interesting critical uncertainty with a positive connotation. Why? Because it's neither Western nor anti-Western in its DNA, and it's actually something new. That is the narrative coming from the Global South powers, and this is going to be a major force of change, let's say, to the better.
Ms. Tchakarova, can you give me the driver of disruption that you are most worried about right now? If you had to choose one. You've given some really nice ones there, but if you had to identify one right now.
That is the AI, because the AI is going to be the game changer, deciding the fate of the new world order. And the AI is going to be at the core of not just the technological competition, but you need geoeconomic component to it because of the major hunger coming from, let's say, data centers, or meaning demand for raw materials. Amid decarbonization, this is, of course, a significant driving force. And last but not least, because it's, in the end, about the use of hard power. The AI and, of course, the technological revolution will enable great powers, the triumvirate of great power competition, to use or not use hard power in terms of conventional, nuclear, and any other kind of arms race, because we are just at the beginning of the new one. So there you go.
AI, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, over to Professor Mechler. What is the one driver of disruption that worries you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks. Wanted to bring that in. That's a good point. So I'm not sure it's the key one, but I wanted to focus a bit on climate and disasters, because that's my field, and maybe there's something to be learned about. But first of all, I'm grateful to be here. First, I've been in Vienna. I'm German. I've been here for a long time, never been here. It's good to be here. And to me, it looks a bit like a mini MSC conference, the Munich Security Conference. I'm a big fan of the Munich conference. It's really great. We need those places where we can talk clearly and frankly about stuff. You don't get it in the media always, not always in the papers, so it's good. Good to be here. Maybe that's wasn't organized for the organizers. But anyway, wanted to talk about, at Munich, I'm German, our chancellor spoke up, and he was also a little bit like my colleague, saying the old order is gone. And then he didn't explain what the new one would be. But then he said, well, we have to do something, and it's not about reducing the risk, but it's taking opportunities. So that was a bit what he was talking about. Maybe to rephrase it, I'm not sure the old order is gone. I hate to believe it, but certainly it's stress tested, it's changing. Maybe it's unraveling. That's what I heard. That's what you maybe agreed to somewhat in the morning. I didn't come in the morning, sorry. So it's unraveling, but we need to think about what else can be done. So what I wanted to talk about very shortly, even if it's unraveling, it's changing, something else is coming in, we need to think about opportunities indeed, like as our chancellor said, I'm not part of the party, whatever. For me, it's a bit about then, when we look at climate and disasters, and more generically, it's about the negative cascading systemic risks, that we need to talk into positive cascading risks. Okay, that's not such a sexy statement. Let me try to talk about this a bit more. So my daily work, I focus a bit on the question, how important is climate and disasters to disruption of global governance, right? I would say it's very important. And this is certainly because we see the negative cascading risks. So these are self-amplifying systemic risks, interrelated risks that are leading to collapse. We're not in climate change era anymore, not in the climate crisis era, we're in the climate emergency. I know also that I'm not so appealing to people, but that's what we see, right? We see systems collapsing, we see water security, food security, human security at stake, so that's certainly occurring. Why is this happening? Maybe going just a little bit deeper. It's happening because the climate is changing, hazards are becoming more frequent, more volatile and stuff like that. But it's also because that's the hazard variable, right? But as we also know, disasters and climate emergencies, climate risks are unnatural. They're not natural, they're unnatural. We also got exposure, we got more people, we have more people at risk. We got also people differentially at risk. That has to do with income, but also with education, other stuff. And then we got vulnerability being a key component here. And that's, I think, also a driver that we in the climate risk department or component also consider. It's of course people are there's inequity, global inequity, right? Access to information, access to resources, geopolitical fragmentation. So that's also driving climate risk, and climate risk would also be driving, of course, I would say, global risk and the lack of good governance that we have. So there's a lot of evidence here that we are seeing that. And then we can say, okay, that's great, and that's the work IIASA is doing, understanding tipping points, so it's all going this direction, right? But that's not good enough, and I think there's interest in this mantra that Merz talked about. Let's turn it into opportunities. And I think that's what's needed. What's needed for that is probably also change maybe of mindset a bit. And then here it's research or like it's analysis we can do, but it's also the personal mindset. We just there's no other way. It's maybe inevitable that we need to turn crisis into opportunity. And what could that be? For example, in the climate domain, I would argue it looks like it's all fragmented, it's disorganized, nothing is happening, but it's not true. Over the last 30 years, we baked climate change into the system. EU holds it, EU does a lot of work, even in Austria, where you don't talk about climate anymore, the current coalition. It's totally in the system, right? It's happening, because it's at the policy level, at the directive level, so it's happening. What does it mean? Austria, like renewable electricity today is like more than 80%, right? In EU, it's 50%. Even globally, it's 40%. And that's great for the climate, but it's also great to be independent of some higher forces looking east, right? So I think that's one way to go into this opportunity space. And I think we just need to do more. And maybe my last word, I know you want to stop me. There's a bit of this framing, and so maybe it sounds naive, a bit too optimistic. We talked about this, but it's also popping up at EU levels. So this negative into the positive, and people call it multiple resilience dividends of taking action on sustainability issues. And yeah.
I promise you more time on the environment later on, I promise.
Okay.
Over to Dr. Kondor now, the driver of disruption for you.
Thank you. So maybe not a main driver of disruption, but an important contributor and an important component in potentially determining outcomes is the possibility for societies to lose resilience and lose the capacity of cooperation. And looking in the Western world, there is many signs that this is happening. This has been happening. You see increased political polarization. You see new leaders who come up with new and strange and crazy ideas and agendas. You see business leaders increasingly influencing politics and increasingly influencing politics only for their own or their company's benefit. And there is a lessened ability for societies, for countries to come together and take actions together, but even within one country to take collective action. So there are signs that this is happening, and our group at the Complexity Science Hub is trying to quantify it. So our group leader, Peter Turchin, already 10 years ago did a quite detailed analysis for the United States. And it indeed shows that multiple indicators come together which then lead to instability and decreased capacity to solve problems. Now we are trying to extend this research to more countries and specifically to European countries, and hopefully we will tackle what's the difference between cooperation on a country level in the EU and the whole EU level as well. So I would say that it is a driver because you see foreign policies of countries changing, swinging. I mean, of course, if you look at the US and look at the joining the Paris Agreement and then quitting and all the back and forth there, but also within Europe there are risks that countries suddenly change track, or countries act in their own narrowly defined self-interest as opposed to the interest of the EU, or country leaders act in a narrowly defined interest of specific power groups within the country, even at the expense of their own society as a whole. And this will, of course, determine the outcome. So when you're thinking about competition between what you say Western and non-Western countries, there is a risk, and of course you might know more about the capacity of collaboration in China or Russia, but we are in some way should be very worried about the capacity of collaboration among our own countries.
Thank you. And finally, if I can get Professor Jenne to present her driver of disruption.
I like how you put us on the spot with this one single
There has to be one
option.
I'm
Can't be
firm
more
on
than
this,
one. We live in the age of polycrisis, right? So a lot of things I could mention that basically are coming together to have a pretty terrific, by which I don't mean great, conjunctural effect on international stability. Coming from the perspective of international relations theory, the focus for many of us, particularly in the kind of realist or neoclassical realist tradition, is, of course, hegemony, right? So global hegemony, meaning what is the structure of the international system, and who serves as a lender of last resort, who serves as a kind of a backstop for international security and global financial stability, right? I mean, the whole Bretton Woods system that was established after World War II, progressively coming apart. This has been speeding up in the last few decades, as we know. Just actually a couple months ago, the US withdrew from 66 international organizations. But this is not coming out of nowhere, right? The nuclear arms framework has been progressively undermined, 20 years ago under George W. Bush, but also Putin, right? So this is gradually coming undone. All of these sort of institutions that collectively we understand as a liberal international order are coming undone, partly because of the massive gap between the haves and the have-nots. That famous elephant curve, which basically says that there's a lot of poorer people in poorer countries that have grown into the middle class, but then there's also a kind of the lower classes of the rich countries that are falling behind the wealthier ones, and feel aggrieved and are giving their political power to populist forces. And if I may say, I am, I think, a direct sort of consequence of these politics, because my institution, Central European University, which for over 20 years was based in Hungary, was essentially no longer allowed the option to continue matriculating students because the Prime Minister and his party launched a full frontal assault on all of our ability to function within Hungary. And this is why we are here in this lovely city of Vienna. So I can say that I have directly lived it. I and all my colleagues and all of our students and staff who have had to change countries because this is no longer the type of country that welcomes our brand of, let's say, liberalism.
Thank you very much, all. There was a reason for which I was mean and asked for one driver disruption, and it was in some way to show that there are so many simultaneous issues that we're having to deal with. And the point I want to get at is how on earth do we prioritize? When we've got so many issues that are all simultaneously shaping and leading to the unraveling of the global order, how on earth do we face them all? Indulge me on this. You've all presented a different driver of disruption. If we were to lock our panelists in a room together and not allow them to leave until they had found an order in which to tackle the problems, what would you come out with? If I could get you to discuss on this, what are you going to prioritize? What comes first? If you can give us the order. We've had AI, we've had climate, we've had the failure of institutions and self-interested nationalism, we've had populism, we've had the polycrisis on a whole. If I could get you to debate it. Should we start with Professor Mechler?
It doesn't matter, right? Sorry, it doesn't matter where you start, I would say, right? Maybe I didn't bring it out. We do climate stuff, but I'm this ecological economist, so we do transdisciplinary research. So it doesn't matter where you start. We can start with climate modeling. We can start with climate governance, which is not falling apart. It's only US drawing out. For me, it doesn't matter. It's all interrelated, and there's different entry points. And I think we got those people at the table here that can talk about this stuff. Maybe another point, but it matters a lot to do it jointly and not in isolation. I forgot to mention IIASA, 72, founded in Vienna. We are a Science Diplomacy Institute. We were founded by the East and the West Bloc. And then we had people from my home country, Germany, East and West Germany here, with Russians, with Americans and everything. And yeah, they collaborated, they worked on common issues that are too large to be solved by individual countries, and out came many issues. For example, I would say IIASA has been a founding member of the IPCC, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Maybe this joint ambition, this collectivism led to something else. And it doesn't matter what it is, right? Because you meet after work and drink, okay, sorry, I forgot. But
No, it's I like your answer on collectivism. I'm not sure you'd escape the locked room, but I think a multidisciplinary working on issues simultaneously approach works. Would anybody else like to chip in and talk about how they would establish a hierarchy for the drivers of disruption? Please.
You mean solutions?
So finding solutions. So you've got these disruptors. How are you dealing with each of them, and in what order?
Yes. So maybe you will find strange that I'm just going to repeat my problem is the most important, but I'm going to say that to solve any problem, we have to find ways for people to be able to cooperate, to work together. So we need to address issues that generate too much instability in our societies. And very interesting, you specifically mentioned the elephant curve and concerns about inequality and people being left behind. So that's one very big component that probably affects Western developed countries more, that there are segments of society who feel left behind, and they might say it's very nice that you can meet in a fancy palace discussing climate change or AI or whatever, but why should we care? Our lives are already bad enough. And then you have the voices who ask in a obviously demagogue way, who will pay the price of climate adaptation, etc. And it's easy to jump that there is no other way, and we just put more pressure on people, often already disadvantaged people, until the system breaks. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So we have to think about how to take collective action, how to take action in an inclusive way. And for most Western countries, but probably also for everywhere, that means thinking about addressing inequalities in wealth. I would say actually inequalities in social power. Social power is something you think how much control you can feel over your own life and others' life. And wealth is nowadays a very good proxy for social power, which hopefully can lead to more ability to cooperate, more ability to make sacrifices where they really matter, and better governance.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tchakarova?
I can just give you a very short overview of my hierarchy. Right now, for 2026, the most urgent questions I receive, no matter whether it's from the public or from the private sector, they are pretty similar. One is there going to be a nuclear exchange? And my answer is no, with quite high plausibility, based on the scenario planning that I outlined in the previous round. And that is because we have entered, in 2026, we have entered the first phase of this new, let's say, international relations framework, which is managed confrontation. So that means that the incentive on both sides, and by the way, it's important, it's not non-Western. The other bloc is anti-Western. I mean, non-Western are the countries, the majority of the countries are non-Western. But the second bloc is actually anti-Western, clearly anti-Western in mindset, clearly anti-Western in DNA and in modus operandi. And it's understandable they have different reading, different imagination, different wishes for the future of the international order. So it's, again, a competition, but it's a managed confrontation, which means, of course, that the incentive on both sides to get engaged in a direct conventional and by extension, nuclear confrontation is very low. So that means also that this kind of formats as Xi Jinping-Trump summit, Putin-Trump kind of summit, whatever, and next step will be trilateral summit, are actually the signs of the time. This is a new kind of era, and it's important to actually lower this kind of misjudgment of the system. A second important hierarchical component, so this is the first one, as I said, no World War III, please, if you listen to read headlines. Of course, World War III would mean something similar of scope and scale as the First and the Second World War, and I don't want you to buy into this kind of thinking, because even if we are in a world confrontation, right now we have much more of understanding about the severity of a mutual destruction. So again, no matter how you judge and assess the rationality of one or other world leader, please do understand that there is an understanding of the need to prevent this kind of scenarios. Same goes for nuclear exchange, same goes for the use of conventional weapons. But the second hierarchical component here is, of course, the very important role of the non-Western powers. And here I have a perfect example for you of the only middle power. Europe is also middle power, by the way. Meanwhile, we have been downscaled to a middle power. There are plenty of middle powers across all continents, but one that has clear profile of strategic autonomy, because we like to talk about strategic autonomy a lot in Europe, because we desire to have it, but we do not have it. So we actually strive for strategic autonomy. That's India. So India is going to be a very, very significant, country on the meta level of international relations by engaging with United States on certain sectors and fields, with Russia on other sectors and fields, and with China. There, of course, what is really important as a mega trend is to manage the regional confrontation, because China and India are in a strategic rivalry context, which again is bad news not only for South Asia, but actually for the whole world. And right now they have managed this confrontation. They have decided that it's better for almost 3 billion people to actually agree on some sort of predictability of the relationship. And again, despite being strategic rivals, these two countries have engaged in a confidence-building mechanisms in trade, in economic portfolio, technological components. And this is the spirit of the era. Yes, we will have a lot of competition. Yes, there will be a lot of dangerous situations. Yes, the number of conflicts will increase. Yes, the proxy wars will also be more will be manifesting in a more specific and peculiar way. But at the same time, the urge to manage to prevent the world from entering an abyss will be much higher and much more collectively defined. And I think I would stop here, that this is probably the good news out of all the, let's say, confusing and worrisome signals coming from the field of international relations.
Thank you. Professor Jenne, would you like to delineate your hierarchy for us briefly?
Well, yeah, so I began with my chosen most major disruptor as being the vacuum in global leadership. So specifically the long-term and now pretty rapid decline of U.S. hegemonic leadership, not only in the region, but also in Europe and in the world. So from my point of view, and I think from any kind of strategist sort of looking at this in a realistic way, there's no way around a terrific disruption that comes from the transition of power from a status quo hegemon to a challenger power, which people have assumed is probably something like China. There have been guesses about other potential leaders, but in the meantime, we're in we're in what might be called a critical juncture that I don't think that there's any way to navigate around except for, and going back to what Dr. Kondor is saying, addressing this sort of the neck in the elephant curve, right? Those classes in liberal democratic societies that feel like they no longer want to sort of prop up the liberal international order, give them some kind of buy-in, right? Maybe a universal basic income. I mean, this could still take a long time to achieve, and there are tremendous costs. And at the same time, achieving strategic autonomy in Europe is also going to require a whole lot more defense spending. And so then you're stuck with the traditional classic guns and butter trade-off that all European societies are, and all developed societies are kind of dealing with at the moment. So yeah, I mean, from my point of view, try to shore up the popular support for a kind of a liberal order, liberal democracy, and to do so, you have to get a buy-in. People have to really believe in the system and in the institutions that they support.
Thank you very much. I want to come back to a point that Ms. Tchakarova made about AI, and to zoom in on technology specifically. And my question for you really is technology a force of disruption, a driver of disruption in its own right, or is it massively exacerbating and perpetuating forces that already exist? So with AI and climate risk, for example, or social media and populism, are we seeing that it's making it worse, or is it its own problem to be tackled? Would anybody like to start?
By explaining why I actually made this call. And in my systems analysis, technology is this layer of global system shifts and global system transformation that has been here before. Over 250 years of technological revolutions. I mean, we had 3 already in the past, and each one was also linked to significant technological breakthroughs, which were the main enabler for global power projection. So the power, the country that was able to basically ride the wave of each of the industrial revolutions, the first and the second one, this was the time of Great Britain, and the last one was decided in the competition between United States and the Soviet Union. And once again, here we are, and I claim that technology will be the field with the sum of the technological breakthroughs. That means that both sides will try, of course, to be the hegemon of technological innovation. And we are already in the middle of this competition. That means that both sides want to win this competition for themselves. And then there are other countries which are lagging behind and will decide either to join one of these 2 centers of power, or maybe to combine forces with, let's say, third powers. We do not know yet. But anyway, AI, as we clearly see, is this kind of silver lining. It's going to be this game changer in terms of enabling either China or United States to be able to thrive on all other domains. Now, my colleagues will, of course, explain the other forces that are behind technology that are also enabling or leading to multiplicative effects. I'm only linking technology to the field of global power competition. And here there is no, let's say, there is an overt statement already. I mean, the masks are off. Both sides have clearly stated that they want to win this competition. And the question mark, of course, is how long it will take, what will be the final outcome. But what we know for a fact is that there cannot be 2 winners, unfortunately. And this is where we are for the moment, and why I think that it's going to be the most decisive, disruptive force in the global and regional power projection and competition.
Would you like to add something, Professor Mechler? Yeah.
Yeah, I could on that. Yeah, I would agree. It's a disrupt in its own right. AI is clear, right? But then it doesn't operate in a vacuum. So it's building also on the inequities, inequitable access to technology. I think what's different about AI is also the speed of it, right? I mean, I may be an oldie here, but just the sheer speed of that and the choices and the decisions that are being made on that technology, which have massive also environmental consequences, right? Geopolitical, economic consequences, but also climate consequences, all these data hubs where they store our damn data. My kids also using it. And so it's a big disruptor, yeah. I would still argue, let's not play it out one against the other, but it's a big one, yeah. So, yeah, thanks.
I'll move on to one more question of the main panel, and then I'll hand over to audience questions. We're talking a lot, and we've spoken already today, about the role of diplomacy in fighting against the collapse of the old order, and in this case, against drivers of disruption. But I have 4 academics sat here, and I have a room full of students. And the question I want to ask you is what is the role of academics and what is the role of students? Because some of us are diplomats, many of us here are not. So what can students do, what can academics do right now, given the state of affairs?
I don't like this distinction between, I also don't like academics, because sometimes I work a lot with NGOs, and when they say academic, they put me in this ivory something, which... but for me, it's a mindset, right? So the research mindset and speaking maybe truth to power, speaking open about what's happening, right? And I think then it doesn't matter whether it's academics, it's students, or whoever it is. But it's really, we need to be clear on what we are seeing. We need to speak up and lay out what we are seeing. And it's not the truth, but it's certainly our perspective on stuff, and then engage in something. And of course, the next generation is always great to have here. I mentioned to Ursula, when I came here, was a bit, I like these high-level debates, but sometimes much more exciting to talk to younger people because the mindset is very different. I got 2 younger people at home, but they don't talk to me, so I'm granddaddy, they don't talk to me, so I'm good to be here. Okay, I shut up.
Professor Jenne?
Yeah, so researchers have shown that we're setting all of these disruptions and all this negative news aside, we're at a kind of a peak of protests around the world. And many of these protests are made up of, university students and professors. And so clearly, the university community, institutes and similar kind of institutions of learning have a crucial function in terms of building ideological power, against these right-wing authoritarian governments. And we can see that people have gone on and performed roles in news organizations. They've gone into governments, into diplomacy. They've become scholars all around the world. There's a reason these governments, these on the right, go after universities first, because they pose a direct threat to their ideological control over society. So I think this sort of follows up on some of what was said here.
Should we hand over to audience questions? Has anybody got anything specific they'd like to ask? We start at the front, the lady with the striped jumper.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. My name is Ramona Reiter. I'm a MICE 2 student here at the Diplomatic Academy. And my question would add on to the discussion on populist forces. And it would be, are nationalist and populist movements primarily reactions to systemic pressures like we talked about inequality? Or would you say they're autonomous political forces that are reshaping or shaping foreign policy and multilateral cooperation from within? Thank you.
Thank you. And if we take one more question. Stefania?
Thank you so much. I'm also a student here at the DA, and it's extremely interesting panel for me because in a certain way I can relate to all of the backgrounds from our speakers today. And one of the points that I really got for myself from this panel is that sometimes to really develop a decision that would make sense for mutually benefiting development, we usually lack the civil society perspective and how something would actually make sense, as well as the science. So my question would be, is there any way how the paradigm can be U-turned in a way that the development can, as Dr. Kondor said, could center societal benefits and development, including the technology, including climate? Because to my point of view, this technological competition, as well as in the past, it has always been in place, is something which is organic to human beings. However, the major cornerstone, in my perspective, is how it would actually benefit us, because climate is a huge thing that just shows like where exacerbation of resource use damages the world, both in terms of ecology and societies that are extracting these resources and bear the price, including water, soil. Thank you.
Shall we start with the first question?
Sure. Okay, so thank you for the question. This is obviously, you could write whole books, and people have written whole books on what are the causes of populist and nationalist movements. The classic sort of debate is between sort of supply side, so basically elite driven. Elites have incentives to stay in power, gain resources, and so they use this kind of Manichaean people versus elite rhetoric in order to gain and maintain power. And the other sort of approach looks at it from a more demand side point of view, which is to say that there are structural inequalities, for example, that are driving forth this kind of anti-establishment movements. And the first is a little bit connected to right-wing sort of populists, the way that people understand right-wing populism, and the second is more connected to left-wing populism. This is kind of the debate. I think both of them, I don't think it's so nice and tidy, sort of a separation, right? Because elites perform a role and the people perform a role, and what gets you into this kind of mindset to begin with is a lack of belief in the system. And this feeling that the system isn't serving your interests and it has to go. And you cannot compromise with the system. You need a whole new regime and a whole new set of leaders. So, what's driving all of this? The system just isn't delivering like it used to. There's a huge amount of disappointment and anger, especially among younger people, but not only, about what the system is promising relative to what it's actually delivering. So I tend to kind of look at it from a more of a structural perspective, with elites performing kind of a functional role in the movements.
Dr. Kondor, would you like to take the second question?
If I may just add
to
this. So I agree with you that these are not two separate. These are very work combined, and I would add that our research shows that these two forces are also generated in combination, because as you have more inequality, you have discontent among the bulk or at the bottom, but also you have more candidates for elites on the top. So this is sometimes termed in our research elite overproduction, although I don't really like overproduction because it sounds very much like something we can easily control, and it's not that easily controlled. But you have people who, due to the economic conditions, become rich, and if you get a couple of million, you can do a lot of fun things. Once you have a couple of 100 million, you run out of all the fun to do, and you think, how can I use my money? And often it is to think about how you can influence politics. So then the same forces that generate discontent also increase competition on the top. And as competition on the top increases, some contenders start to, what you might say, bend the rules or think out of the box, you might say, think out of the accepted norms, and some of them might realize they can channel discontent for their benefit, and we can debate a lot if some of these outsiders really want to change the system for the better. This not necessarily matters. In a lot of cases, they don't, and you might get a change of government, and they continue to contribute to the forces that generated the crisis in the first place.
Thank you. And for the second question, would anybody like to pitch in? Thank you, Professor Mechler.
The second question to be like, can we make policies that have global impact, can we make it more tangible for local citizens? I understood it like this. I would agree, and I think it's not how we do it, but we have to do it. And I think that happens a little bit with the Green New Deal, one could argue, that was going in that direction. Mitigation, greenhouse gas reduction, plus resilience, plus adaptation needs to be coupled. Remained a little bit high level and so on, but 2 weeks back I was actually at the CEU in Budapest. It's alive. I was pleasantly surprised at your headquarters, so it was great. We had a big meeting with 100 regions across Europe. It was about adaptation and resilience, but it was a lot about other stuff, mitigation, so climate mitigation, but also affordable housing, good housing, and also dealing with many other issues. So I think it's totally going in that direction, and I think it has to go in that direction, because else you lose the population in this complex, multi-poly crisis situations that we're all in. So you need to create tangible benefits, and I think it's possible. And that was when I went in the beginning, what I meant in the beginning with this negative and the positive cascades, which was a little bit up there. But that's, I think, what's needed, and I think policy is seeing that, is recognizing that. Politicians also, maybe in New York, the mayor, like affordability. So we need these things in a value-driven way, but I think it has to go that direction. Yeah, thanks.
Shall we take one more audience question? Let's have one gentleman. Marek at the back. Thank you.
Hello. So my name's Marek. I'm Mice One. And since we have such an august set of speakers here, especially on the topic of populism, I just wanted to ask, since in the 1800s we had a lot of left-wing populism in the form of the current social democrats, communists, socialists, and the whole development of that side of populism. Now we're seeing the development of the right wing of populism. What would you say is something that the left can offer to counter this populism around the world? Because to me it seems that there's a lot of political innovation on the political right wing of most countries, Europe, United States, South America. But then on the left wing, you see maybe a co-opting, but a very little originality in terms of ideas, very little innovation in that sense. So just curious to hear your thoughts.
Sort of like your last question, isn't it? Well, that is $1 million question for lefties such as myself, full disclosure. You're right. This is the dominant headline in the research on populism, that it is populist nationalism and not just, populist, kind of non-nationalist, like cosmopopulism, right? This is what we see predominantly, especially in Western European, developed countries. But it's not the case that there haven't been innovations on the left, and it's not the case that they are not still alive with us, right? You still have in the US diehard, Bernie Sanders folks, or now Zoran Mamdani, right? The torch continues to be carried. In Spain, you had Podemos. In Greece, you had Syriza, right? This is an ancient history. So, and there has been an effort to link up these populist movements across Europe to address the democratic deficit in the EU, this perception that the EU machinery is very, very, very distant from the lives of, your average EU citizen. So there are these kind of more on the ground kind of populist movements. The problem, as I see it, is that in the end, it's all about kind of this corporate sort of hierarchy, right? It's about neoliberalism that's still kind of running the day. Capitalism is still kind of, not being directly addressed in the ways that it's not delivering for so many, the vast swaths of societies around the world who naturally then gravitate towards any kind of either right-wing or left-wing kind of movement. And you've seen this fracturing everywhere, right? So what was the question? How do we get out of this mess? Or what is that? Oh, right, how to do the lefty thing, yes. You need a buy-in, right? Again, I come back to universal basic income, right? Or some types of benefits that are available to people who are struggling and who don't see themselves reflected in the current neoliberal, liberal democratic system that's been, pretty bloodless, pretty, lifeless, not much to offer to your average person, both on the right and the left. So yeah, benefits, social benefits, but who's going to pay for them? The rich people. How do you get them to pay for it? You know, you really need, you know, heroic politicians, and I don't see a lot of them around.
To end on a positive note, I will conclude briefly to say that it's been a privilege to consult with such a wide range of experts, and that I think it's been interesting to see how connections can be made between each of their different disciplines and fields. Although there may be drivers of disruption everywhere that we look and in almost everything that we read, there are also drivers of union and of community and of collaboration, and I think there are many of them in this room with us today. To end on that, could I ask each of you very briefly in a few lines to mention something that has perhaps given you motivation or a sentiment of hope or has inspired you, either in the news, in your daily lives, in the past weeks or months? Can I ask somebody to start? Please do. Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, I'm quite optimistic about the future of humankind because we, as a collective group of human beings, have thrived through times of war. Actually, most of the times that have determined us were times of war. And we have proven again and again that you know, our ability to collaborate, to come up with solutions, to tackle difficult situations, dangerous situations to humanity, and I'm quite optimistic actually about the humankind that we are once again going to actually cope with this, let's say, new world order. Second, I'm also quite optimistic about my niche because you know, from a personal perspective, I'm able to kind of, first and foremost, scale down the fear, whether it's about a person, whether it's about a corporative client, whether it's about an institutional representative or a political decision maker. Decisions that we take based on fear and emotional, you know, negative emotions are actually tend not to be very wise and long-term oriented. And I argue that we indeed can reduce the complexity and the uncertainty by applying, and that's my third takeaway, applying actually interdisciplinary systems thinking, complexity science, and basically in the future you will not be able, because you are the next generation, and there will be a dire need for diplomacy and a dire need for future decision makers in both the political and the economic sphere, not to speak of the social domain, and you will have to acquire these skills of systems thinking and of actually thriving in an environment of uncertainty and complexity is going to be the new mantra, and that's totally okay. I mean, this is something that should not actually make you kind of feel bad about the future, but on the opposite, it will discipline you, it will train you, and it will make you actually more resilient as personalities, but also within your groups of interaction, because we are living also in a highly connected world, and that's actually the way how it's going to be. And final point I want to make, which has nothing to do with the final question, but I want to also draw your attention, because I understand that here in Europe, of course, we are mostly focused with populism coming from the far right angle, but just be mindful of the fact that we are in a new competition. So when I said manage confrontation, do not think, okay, it's not going to be a World War III, it's going to be just a Cold War, whatever, and that's going to be fine with us. No, it's not going to be fine with you. You all are going to be also objects. We are going to be objects of warfare. It's going to be a hybrid warfare, it's going to be a cognitive warfare, it's already happening, and you have to be very mindful of this fact. You cannot rely only on your government or on your decision makers to equip you with the necessary toolbox. You have to be proactive on the matter. So when I hear, for instance, that we are so worried about the populism coming from the far right, I'm like, okay, how about second economic power in the world with an international network of 350 plus parties around the world, all based on Leninism, Marxism in the world? Why are we not worried about that, that this is also something that's going to shape not only the world order, but it's going to shape all the citizens of the countries that are object of our competition. So please be more vigilant. More vigilant about what? In the end, it's always reduced to one and the same question. It is the question about freedom or not. Freedom on individual, freedom on societal level, freedom on political, at the political level. And that is going to be the question for the next years and decades to come. Thank you.
Over to you, Professor Mechler. A few words on hope.
That was almost like a final statement. Very good. Yeah. Dramatic. I like it. Yeah. Maybe a lot of things. So great to be here. Good to get the questions. Exciting. For me, maybe this tangibility of things, right? Making it more tangible. I think you were going in that direction, Velina. Making it even more tangible, and then maybe as this little example that this $1 million question, why is the left not stepping up? And I like the comment by Erin, because implementation is about implementation on the left side, implement what's needed. And then the wealth tax. So yesterday, radio, finance minister of Austria said wealth tax not happening this coalition period, we'll do it the next one. But that's a classic example. There's a lot of evidence that these inequities are driving disruption, and we heard it today. Science evidence, but really making it understood by the population is very complicated. It will have big benefits to all of us. None of us is super rich in the room, right? Okay. So I think this is a super example. Make it tangible. So I really look forward to how Martha Bauer will do it in the next period. And I think that's a nice one to make it really tangible. And so, yeah, that's what I take away. Thanks.
Dr. Kondor?
Yeah, so maybe to add a bit, so I was talking about inequality in wealth, inequality in power, and how inequality in wealth determines inequality in power nowadays, which sounds like a very bad thing. And in a historical perspective, I might add that it's already an improvement where for most of recorded human history, inequality in power meant inequality in the ability and willingness to do violence. So in some way, replacing direct violence with wealth might already be a step which creates different set of problems. And more generally, if we look at human history, crises have always had enormous human consequences. So looking in this perspective, what we might hope that we will be dealing a lot of crises, but hopefully it's even if we cannot avoid them, we can lessen their impact and soften them, even though they will look very bad when they happen and very challenging to handle.
And the final word.
Oh, I feel like everyone has covered everything I would have said. So I don't really have that much to add. But I will say, going back to the finding that is very robust, that we are at a kind of a medium/longer term zenith of protest activity around the world, again, that is mostly driven by younger people. And added to that, the findings of the political sociologist Bob Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone. He has a kind of a new work out that sort of tracks the use of I in how book titles are formulated versus we as a kind of a measure of solidarity in societies. And he calls it the I-we-I curve, meaning that we were in this kind of period of like solidarism with society, and now we're kind of in this I sort of period. He says it always kind of reverts backwards, right? I mean, we're at a kind of an awkward, scary time, And so in the short term, I am kind of pessimistic. I think we're going to be going through things that we have no idea about in the next few years. But I do think that societies have formed resilience on the local level in particular, and we're going to make it through this time. So I guess that's the most optimistic that you could get out of me.
No, thank you very much. And maybe we can take I, we, I and make it I, we with the next panel, which will be on renewal, rebuilding global governance in 20 minutes time at 20 past. Thank you so much to our panelists.